Before the dazzling lights of the launch party began to shine on perfect smiles and glamorous gowns, Kat and Chelsea shared a rare, quiet moment together. In the softly lit dressing room, they spoke not of fame or flashing cameras, but of trust, insecurity, and the strange unease Chelsea couldn't explain, as if something was lurking, waiting to go wrong. Kat, with her instinctive protectiveness, brushed it off with a light smile, suggesting it was nothing more than the usual pressure that came with stepping into the Dupree world. But Chelsea couldn't ignore the heaviness in her chest, the suffocating feeling that didn't come from the corset she wore, but from the distant glances, the dripping whispers of those displeased by her presence, too close to the Dupree name, too prominent beside Madison, the woman she never thought she could fall so deeply in love with. The party began like a flawless symphony, every detail seemingly perfect. Yet the atmosphere shifted the moment Chelsea slipped away from the glittering lights to find a moment of quiet backstage. Down the long corridor leading toward the wings, someone was waiting. No sound. No warning. A figure emerged from the shadows, black gloves, indistinct shape, tall enough to make Chelsea instinctively step back. As she turned to retreat, a hand gripped her neck, yanking her backward, and a chilling shiver ran down her spine as the sharp scent of chloroform filled her nose. The world blurred. Light vanished. Kat was gone. Madison was gone. Only a single question echoed in her fading consciousness: why? That question didn't just drag Chelsea into darkness, it sent shockwaves through the entire Dupree family. This was no accident. It was a calculated strike, timed with precision at the very moment the family needed perfection. And so came the questions: was Chelsea the true target all along, or had she simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time? If it were random, why the chloroform? Why the gloves? Why only when she was alone? Every detail pointed to a plan carefully laid, by someone who knew the event's routines, who knew Chelsea's habits, who knew she would break away from the crowd at that precise moment. Suspicion quickly turned to names no one wanted to speak aloud. Allison. The woman whose irritation was always palpable whenever Chelsea's name came up. The one who once declared, "Chelsea doesn't deserve Madison." At the time, it had been dismissed as nothing more than a heated remark, a personal outburst not worth dwelling on. But when Allison's repeated coincidental appearances near Chelsea and Madison's dates began to link together, the pattern was too stark to ignore. Once might be chance. Twice could be coincidence. But 4, 5 times? Every time Chelsea and Madison carved out a private moment, Allison was there, lingering silently, never unseen. No one dared accuse Allison outright, but her silence only deepened suspicion. To outsiders, she appeared calm, composed, harmless, without motive to endanger anyone. Yet beneath that composure might lie a heart consumed by turmoil, jealousy hidden behind a mask of pride. Madison, the woman she had once shared years of closeness with, now devoted herself to Chelsea, the very person Allison believed unworthy, incapable of truly understanding Madison's depths, leaning only on the Dupree name and the glare of status. If Madison was someone Allison could not lose, then Chelsea's presence might indeed be the greatest threat of all. But others argued it was not about love at all, but about politics. The Dupree family, with its history and deep influence in Fairmont Crest, had no shortage of enemies in the shadows. Striking at someone like Chelsea could fracture the family's carefully curated image, shake the foundation Vernon and Anita had built. This was a silent attack, no blood, no bullets. But a direct blow to their collective psyche. If Chelsea disappeared for hours or days at the height of the family's show of unity, who would suffer most? Not only Chelsea, but Madison, Kat, and the entire new generation being paraded as the heirs of the dynasty. Chelsea awoke in an unfamiliar room, dim light filtering through heavy drapes, her wrists bound tightly in ropes that left no doubt this was no cruel prank. In that moment, she understood that what had happened was no longer personal. Whether it was Allison or a hidden power, she was no longer an outsider. She had been dragged into the heart of a power struggle she had never imagined herself part of. She was now a link in a chain, pulled into the center, not because she wanted to be, but because someone believed she didn't belong. And Chelsea knew, if she wished to survive, if she wished to keep her love with Madison, to hold Kat's trust, she would have to embrace this war, even if she was unprepared. Because when the darkness calls your name, you are left with only two choices: run from it, or learn how to walk within it. Andre walked into the hospital with his heart pounding as if it might burst from his chest. He didn't know exactly what had happened, only that Derek was dead, news as cold and sudden as a knife cutting through the suffocating air around him. Andre wasn't here because of any close bond with Derek, but because Ashley, the woman who had once been his everything, was certain to be present. He wasn't thinking of himself, nor calculating whether this might be a chance at forgiveness. He simply wanted to make sure she wasn't alone when the storm hit. What he hadn't expected was that the storm was already waiting for him the moment he stepped through the hospital's main doors. Ashley stood there, her eyes red, though whether from grief or anger he couldn't tell. She didn't step forward, nor did she retreat. As Andre drew closer, asking with concern, she lifted her hand. Not to ward him off, but to create a line, a barrier of distance between them. Her voice was firm, stripped of the tenderness it once carried. "You lied to me." Andre froze, startled, before she continued, this time striking directly at his chest. "I saw you with Danny. The two of you together, as if nothing had ever stood between you. You swore to me it was over, so what was that?" The hospital lobby seemed to fall still for a moment. Passers-by unconsciously slowed, sensing the confrontation that required no further explanation. Andre tried to remain calm, but his lips pressed tightly together as if to swallow the shock. He didn't deny it, he couldn't, because what Ashley had seen was no illusion. Yet he couldn't nod in guilt either, because it wasn't as simple as betrayal. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke, saying it had been just a moment, that he and Danny shared a past that had never been properly closed, not out of love but out of wounds left unhealed. He admitted his mistake in letting it happen, but insisted he had never gone a single day without thinking of Ashley. Ashley was silent. Longer than he expected. Long enough for Andre to realize he was no longer someone she would instinctively listen to. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, but her eyes carried hundreds of unspoken questions that needed no answers. When she finally spoke, her words bore the tone of someone who had just lost something sacred: trust. "I don't need you to explain so I can forgive you. I needed the truth back then, not now. Maybe I wanted to believe you, but maybe I was also waiting for a reason to let go." The ground beneath Andre seemed to tilt. He didn't want her to walk away, not today of all days, when she had already lost another person dear to her. But neither could he beg. Honor, even tarnished, was the only thing he still had left. And so, standing in the very lobby where memories of waiting, of worrying for each other still lingered, he chose to hold himself tall, meet her eyes, and say, "I won't ask you to forgive me today. But if there comes a day when you're calm enough to look back, I'll still be here, with the truth, with nothing left hidden." Ashley gave no reply. She turned, walking slowly toward the patient's room, leaving Andre standing alone in a silence louder than any justification he could offer. He didn't know if this was the end, or merely a pause. But he did know that something in her eyes had shattered. And if he ever hoped to mend it, he would need to do more than wait. He would have to learn how to repair not just his actions, but the past itself. Because love, if it still lived, couldn't survive on vows of regret. It could only endure through the courage to face what was broken, and the willingness to piece it back together, shard by shard. The rare peace at Fairmont Crest was shattered mercilessly when Leslie appeared at Anita's doorstep, not with warmth or nostalgia, but with a face of steel and eyes that would not be moved. No one had anticipated her arrival, and fewer still could fathom why the very first person she wished to confront was the woman she had once vowed never to see again. But Leslie had not come to reconcile. She came for something more important than pride or dignity, the truth. And that truth, if dragged into the light, would threaten to unravel everything Anita had so carefully built on cunning, control, and deception. Eva, who had lived long enough with her mother to notice every subtle shift in behavior, began piecing together fragments that didn't align. Leslie said nothing of where she was going. She simply dressed with unusual precision and left the house in silence, as though stepping into a battle she had already mapped out. Eva, sharp and intuitive, knew nothing with Leslie was ever by chance. And when she asked where her mother was headed, the name Anita slipped from her lips like a curse. Eva understood instantly: if Leslie had chosen to confront Anita, it could not be about old grievances. It had to be something far more dangerous, something that threatened someone in the family, perhaps Eva herself, Chelsea, or even Vernon. As predicted, when Leslie crossed Anita's threshold, the room erupted in a storm of fury unlike anything seen before. Anita, always so poised, so imperious, suddenly unraveled into a woman nearly consumed by panic. There were no pleasantries, no masks of civility. Only a cold command to the staff, "Get her out of here." And then, in a desperate strike, Anita lunged forward, slapping Leslie, not to wound, but to silence her, to push her back, to force her retreat. But Leslie did not retreat. Not this time. She only lifted her head, her eyes blazing with the fire Anita had spent years trying to suppress. What could terrify Anita so completely? Perhaps it was a secret tied to Vernon, an incident buried years ago that Leslie had stumbled upon while digging into a charitable foundation. Or maybe it involved a large sum siphoned from a political fund, money redirected to one of Anita's confidants without Vernon's knowledge. If exposed, it wouldn't just ruin reputations, it would destroy Vernon's career, and Anita knew it. Or perhaps the secret lay closer, buried deep in the history between Anita and Leslie themselves. Before Leslie left Fairmont Crest, the two women might have shared a truth that, if resurrected, would strip them both of their standing. Perhaps it was something from their university days, or a hidden relationship Anita had long buried, terrified that Leslie would unearth it now, just as all eyes were fixed on the Dupree family. Meanwhile, at the Dupree estate, Vanessa appeared with the look of someone carrying news too heavy to soften. Her face was taut, her eyes locked on Vernon and Anita, measuring every word before speaking something grave. Perhaps she had learned from a reliable source that a federal investigation was zeroing in on someone connected to an investment fund Vernon once sponsored. Or perhaps she had discovered a leaked document linking Chelsea's name to a confidential file that, if exposed, could pull the family into a media firestorm with no escape. Whatever it was, Vanessa hadn't come to seek counsel. She came to declare it an act that could either salvage everything or destroy it outright. And if Leslie was confronting Anita at the same time Vanessa was delivering her warning to the Duprees, then surely these weren't coincidences. They were fragments of a larger conspiracy, a truth buried so long it had begun clawing its own way out of the dark. Anita, the woman who had always commanded with icy precision, now stood on the edge of collapse, not from one strike but from doors of the past flinging open all at once, dragging forth people she could no longer control. Leslie was no longer the exiled woman of years gone by. Vanessa was no longer the obedient niece content with silence. And Fairmont Crest, once the Dupree's fortress, was fracturing under whispers, glances, and leaked files. What came next would no longer be a family dispute, but the beginning of a fracture too deep to be mended with money or power, only with truth, no matter how devastating. The tension carried into Martin's private office like a storm that refused to dissipate. When Smitty entered, no long explanation was necessary. The heavy look in his eyes and the low timbre of his voice were enough. "We've got a problem." Though vague, the words bore a weight that made the air constrict. But what truly troubled Smitty wasn't money, lawsuits, or a rival's sabotage. The danger was far closer, festering within the very heart of the home they had built, a danger no contract or strategy could shield against: love, and the choices of the two children they cherished as their own. Samantha and Tyrell, the twins Martin and Smitty had raised as though born of their blood, had always been the family's brightest light. Their love for them was never an obligation, but a deliberate choice after years of searching for what family truly meant. And now, that bond was threatened by something neither man could have foreseen. The twins' biological mother had resurfaced. A woman stepping out of the past, carrying stories, tears, and a whole world Samantha and Tyrell had never been given the chance to choose. No one could predict what would happen. No law could forbid grown children from seeking their origins. And no heart was cold enough not to stir at the call of blood. Smitty didn't say it aloud, but Martin understood. The fear wasn't of being abandoned, but of wondering whether their love and sacrifices had been enough to hold the twins close. This wasn't a legal battle. It was a collision between years of shared memories and the unanswered mysteries of the past. Martin, who had always kept control, suddenly felt small before a reality that no negotiation could bend. He thought of Tyrell's late-night studies, of Samantha resting her weary head on his shoulder after long school days. He thought of laughter echoing through the kitchen, lazy weekend mornings, even petty arguments that had ended in warmth. He knew that if one, or both, chose to leave, no one would be at fault. Yet the emptiness they'd leave behind would be irreplaceable. Smitty, the quieter one who often hid his emotions, could not mask his worry this time. In his eyes was something rare, helplessness. Together they had built a home, not with bricks and mortar, but with trust in time. But now, that home might no longer be big enough for four, if even part of the twins' hearts belonged to another place they believed was truly theirs. There was no plan B. No fixer to step in. This was the real trial, not of law or power, but of empathy. They couldn't hold Samantha and Tyrell back through selfishness. But neither could they let them go without fighting with love. Martin clenched his fists, his gaze firm. If this was a turning point they could not avoid, he would not let it pass without making one thing clear: this house, no matter who had given them life, would always be theirs to return to, without ever needing permission. And so, the storm did not come from outside, but from the trembling within hearts terrified of being forgotten. Smitty and Martin could not control Samantha and Tyrell's decision. But they could give them what mattered most: choice free of coercion, love that asked for nothing in return, and a family, whether fractured or whole, that would always remain real, as long as it was built on loyalty and courage.